What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American, here today to react and continue learning about things that us Americans should know about Canada. Part 2. If you haven't seen Part 1, feel free to go check that out first, or stay here in Part 2. That's perfectly fine as well. But in Part 1, I started learning about a whole bunch of very interesting things that I never knew about before, about Canada and Canadian culture. So I'm excited to pick up today where we left off in Part 1 and see what other surprising things I'm gonna learn about Canada. So let's pick up here where we left off with number 18. The Queen of England is not our national leader. She's just a figurehead and somebody to put on our money with the birds. Okay, well, first of all, this article must be a little out of date because obviously the Queen has passed away, rest in peace, and now we have King Charles. And I do think this is confusing for a lot of Americans. Like, I know that the national leader of Canada is the Prime Minister, but we do get confused about, like, the role of the British royalty in Canada, and it is on the money. Is the Queen, like, still on all of the Canadian money, or has that started to be, like, recirculated and remade, maybe with King Charles? I'm a bit curious about that. That must take a while, though, huh? Anyway, she's just a figurehead, somebody to put our money on. I don't know, is that selling it like a little short? I think a lot of Canadians take some kind of pride in the relationship with like the British monarchy and the royalty being on the Canadian currency and that whole relationship. And I think a lot of Canadians really did admire and love the Queen. I don't know how people feel about King Charles and all that, but this is an interesting this is an interesting one because I do think Americans don't understand this. So this is actually a good one. Number 19. Our states are called provinces. this is a very good one. This is definitely something Americans need to know about Canada. I gotta be completely honest. I didn't know what the different areas of Canada were called or referred to as for an embarrassingly long amount of time. Like, I don't know. I don't know where we go wrong in our little American geography classes or what. But the word province is not like a very well known word in the United States. Like, even when we think of other areas around the world, not even Canada, when we think of all countries, sometimes, like I notice, Americans, we talk to each other and we're like, yeah, in France, so there's this area. Is it like a state or yeah, Canada? Like is Ontario is that like a state? Like we just reference everything back to what we know here in America. It's kind of embarrassing, but it kind of is what it is. I've like most Americans don't even like I've never said the word province before. So this is a great one. Our states are called provinces. That doesn't even really make sense. Like, the Canadian provinces are called provinces, but this is written so that us Americans can kind of understand, I think. We even have 3 territories. That's something that most Americans don't know as well. I have at least, like, learned that much over time, that there's the provinces and the territories. 10 provinces. Most Americans can't name more than Ontario, maybe Nova Scotia, Quebec, maybe British Columbia. That's about it, honestly. Most Americans don't know the names of most of the Canadian provinces. Do Canadians out there, do you know all 50 American states? Like, come on, it has to go both ways a little bit. Although there's a lot less provinces. We should probably know them. We should probably pay attention in our geography classes. But God knows, it's tough enough to remember all of our 50 states to begin with. Number 20, we do not have snow all year round. This is such a good one. This is such a good one. This must sound so silly to Canadians, but I swear to you, this is such a common misconception for Americans. Oh man, I used to think this like throughout my entire childhood, growing up, even as an adult for many years. I thought Canada just was always cold and covered in snow. I don't know, that's just how it's depicted here in America. This exaggeration. Like, we do not live in igloos. Right! Even that is a stereotype here in America. Like, if we think about it for a second, obviously, like, it's borderline insulting, actually, that when I look at this from a Canadian point of view, that like Americans think, oh, you just live in your igloos. Like, what? Are you trapped in the like 13th century? Like you haven't invented houses yet? It's nothing about that makes sense. Now, there are parts of Canada, if you get really north, that are like pretty much always cold and even snow. And maybe there are people like living in igloos. I don't know, in some parts of Canada, like really really isolated parts of northern Canada. I don't know, but not at all to the extent that us Americans think. Like many Americans, like this is embarrassing. Most Americans even think that it's always snowing in Canada, always cold, and people live in igloos. it's it's funny for me to talk about now that I know better. But I even used to think this stuff. Truly, truly. We do not ride around on dog sleds. We do not have to check the backyard for polar bears before we let our kids go out to play. Yeah. I mean, it's really quite amusing to me now. What do Canadians think about this? Like, are you aware of how deep this stereotype runs in America? Like, I'm here to say it is totally true. Like, many Americans really have a totally wrong depiction of Canada. Like, I've even learned about how Canada has many different climates and geographical features, like mountains, even like some deserts or prairies, and like really beaches, like beautiful, diverse places. And when Americans think of Canada, like we just don't think of that. We just think like, oh, it's like flat and cold with some forest maybe, maybe some maple syrup. Watch out for the polar bears. Seriously, it sounds childish, but it's amazing how true that is. So this is absolutely maybe one of the top one of the top ones on this entire list of things Americans should know about Canada. I'm here to say. Number 21. Many Canadians have never played hockey in their lives. There are many who do not like hockey. What? Is this true? See, I thought this was a stereotype, but maybe a stereotype that's actually has some truth in it. Like, I think Canadians do enjoy hockey more than certainly the United States and other countries, and it's not a negative stereotype. Like, that's cool. That's like a cool little thing Canada has going for it, and Canadians are good at hockey, but maybe the stereotype gets overblown a bit. Like, not every Canadian plays hockey, whereas there's people and Americans that would be tempted to assume that. And there's even Canadians who don't like hockey. Wow, can't you get kicked out of Canada for that? Isn't that against the law? Okay, there I go. I couldn't help it. All right, besides, our national sport is not hockey, it's lacrosse. That, like, talk about random. If lacrosse is indeed the Canadian national sport, Canada hasn't done a great job at making that readily apparent. Not very good at marketing that. Not that it really matters, but I have never once in my life thought about Canada and being associated with lacrosse. I don't know why. I don't follow lacrosse. Maybe people who are following lacrosse know more about it and are like, oh yeah, Canada is great at it. It's their national sport. I had no idea. Basically, all Americans have no idea that lacrosse is popular in Canada or a national sport. Or we really associate hockey with Canada, truly. Okay, moving along. 23, we didn't invent hockey. We just made it better. Really? I didn't assume that hockey was invented in Canada. Although a lot of Americans might, because we really do associate it that deeply with Canada. 24, even if an American team wins the Stanley Cup, it doesn't matter to us because all your best players are Canadian. is, the, is that true? I don't follow hockey really. I don't know about our American hockey teams. Do Canadians take solace in the fact that, hey, even if American teams win the Stanley Cup, there's Canadians on those teams? I would be inclined to believe this as true. I think Canadians are very well known for being fantastic at hockey, and they're probably drafted onto American teams, right? So that makes sense to me. 25. On the other hand, if a Canadian team wins the Stanley Cup, we ignore the fact, oh no, we're talking about the World Series of baseball. Okay, on the other hand, if a Canadian team wins the World Series of baseball, we ignore the fact that all our baseball players are American. It goes both ways. It goes both ways. So Americans are probably like some of the best in the world at baseball. That's considered like our national pastime sport. So it kind of goes both ways. Canadians, like we hire all the Canadian hockey players. Canadians scoop up all the American baseball players. It's a friendly little balance there. 26. Stop asking if we know somebody in Canada when we when you find out we're Canadian. We don't know everyone in Canada. That's a funny one. This is something that Americans should know. Americans need to know about Canadians. I don't know why this is a thing. This is like I think this is somewhat true, actually. I don't know why. It might just go to show you like our weird warped perspective as Americans. Like we view the rest of the world as like a small place or something. It makes no sense. Like if Americans run into a Canadian, for one thing, it's like very exciting because we very rarely have like people from other countries around where we live in lots of parts of America. America is so gigantic. Like it's pretty rare for someone outside the country to be there. So first of all, we're like, whoa, you're Canadian. Cool. What's your igloo like? Like you got to get past that whole conversation. And then, very embarrassingly, Americans will be like, do you know Bob? Like the one other Canadian I know of? which makes no sense at all. Like Canada is a big place and there's like 38, 39 million Canadians. I don't know what this is or what this means about us Americans, why we think I don't know why we do that or why we think that, but that definitely is something that Americans are guilty of. Okay. 27. We have no right to keep and bear arms. In Canada, okay, so leave your guns at home if you're visiting. Otherwise, they'll be confiscated at the border. Well, yeah, first of all, like, if you were traveling internationally, like even across the US Canada border, I don't think you should, like, have any real reason to bring a gun with you, even if you are a full blooded American with your my guns and your firearms and you're into that whole thing. I don't know why it would be necessary to bring it into another country that you're visiting, especially Canada. Like, you should probably feel safer in Canada than in the United States if you're carrying it for self protection or whatever. But yeah, Americans do definitely need to realize the Canadian gun laws are different. And this is a very touchy subject in America because a lot of Americans are very passionate about this right in particular, and it is a full-blown right here in America, the right to bear arms and own firearms. In Canada, we have very strict gun laws, and fully automatic weapons are pretty much illegal. It takes an act of God to get a license to own a pistol. That's funny to me almost because it's so easy here in the United States to get a pistol or a rifle or really many types of guns. You can go to a store and oftentimes go home that same day with a firearm, which is kind of scary. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. It's scary to think that it's that easy in the United States, but you know it's something that we kind of grow up being used to. The idea that most Americans probably have a gun of some sort at home or maybe even in their car.
and it's pretty easy to get them. Yeah, it kind of is what it is. This may be a contributing factor as to why we have about 600 homicides a year. Sure, sure, like definitely, it's hard to argue that guns are so accessible here in America. Like that has to have some kind of negative effect as far as gun violence. Like it's you just can't argue with that. So yeah, back to the point here. Yeah, Americans definitely need to understand if if we're traveling into Canada, like there I don't know why you would feel a need to bring your gun and you're going to be stopped at the border. I don't know what the laws around that are. And it's just a whole different gun culture in Canada, I would think, right? Like Canadians would probably be very uncomfortable knowing that you have like a full blown gun in your car and you're just driving around with it. But that's somewhat normal in the United States. Like it's very much legal, and if you get the correct permit, not that hard actually. So yeah, that's a very very big difference. Yeah, that Americans should be more aware of for sure. 28. The border between Canada and the United States holds the title of world's longest undefended border. I have heard of this one. I think if most Americans thought about it, Americans would like realize, yeah, we do have a really, really long border with Canada. But I don't know what it is. I don't know what mental block we have. But when I used to picture Canada, it was really, really tough. Like I still to this day don't have a super clear idea in my mind, a mental picture of what Canada looks like exactly. Or I didn't even know how south Canada reached into the United States. Like how deep Ontario actually goes southward into the United States. Like Ontario is more south than some of the states in the United States. Like most Americans don't even know that. So yeah, I know that Canada and U.S. have the biggest undefended border, which is actually really awesome that we have that relationship. But the what I'm taking away from this is that a lot of Americans might not realize that, and definitely don't realize like geographically how much Canada like where Canada is. It's kind of funny to put it that way, because it's so silly. Like because we Canada is like touching the United States, but believe me, a lot of Americans don't know like what Canada even really looks like. I don't know where we went wrong. 29. Our side of Niagara Falls is nicer looking than your side. Okay, now we're just bragging. In fact, even when Americans use images of the falls in advertising and in movies, they film the Canadian side. It's called Horseshoe Falls. That's right, because anytime I'd seen Niagara Falls, I didn't even know for a long time that there was like an American and Canadian side to Niagara Falls. I didn't know that. And I always saw videos or images of like the Maid of the Mist, like driving under Niagara Falls, and you put on the poncho and you get wet, and that whole thing. It was in Bruce Almighty, the that movie with Jim Carrey. And it's always the Canadian side. I never realized that, but I think that this isn't even bragging. I think this is true. The Canadian side is just better. Okay. We own the North Pole. Really? Does Canada own the North Pole? Does anyone own the North Pole? Hold on. And therefore, Santa Claus is Canadian. Okay. The internationally recognized mailing address for St. Nick is Santa Claus, North Pole, Canada, ho ho ho, 31. This is a thing? Like Santa Claus is internationally recognized as Canadian? Does Canada really like own the North Pole, or is that an exaggeration? What do you mean you own the North Pole? Could you like set up a vacation spot there or something, like some kind of somewhere that people could like take a cruise to? The North Pole? I don't know if you'd want to do that. Okay. Maybe Americans should know this, because I thought the North Pole was just like neutral or something. Uh, it's Canadian, and so is Santa Claus. that's, that's funny. 31. We call Eskimos Inuit because that's what they call themselves. I've heard the word Inuit. I and I've heard the word Eskimo. I didn't know those were synonymous, that they meant the same thing. This is like indigenous native Canadians, I think. Are they called Eskimos, or is that a certain group of Canadians? I'm a little fuzzy on this. But most Americans have heard the words Eskimo and Inuit. We're just a little confused about what those mean exactly. 32. That movie you thought was filmed in New York or Seattle or Chicago or LA may have been filmed in Vancouver, Montreal, or Toronto. Really? I guess that's true. It, I don't really, yeah, because most Americans, myself included, if we saw just like a small clip of a city, I would have no idea if it's Vancouver or Montreal or Toronto. Big cities just kind of look like big cities when you're filming them close up on streets and stuff. But for some reason, I never think of movies being filmed in Canada. I do assume they're filmed here. It's kind of like how most Americans assume that actors are all American. And then there's people like Jim Carrey, and others like Ryan Reynolds, who were really, really shocked when we're like, they're Canadian? What? Like, when did that happen? Because we just assume everyone's American if they talk like us, I guess. So it's kind of like, sort of related to that. Like, I just assume all cities are American, even though that makes no sense to assume that. I don't know, maybe that's a very American frame of mind, to just assume when I see things in movies and TV, it's like, oh, that's an American, that must be in America, because it looks like our stuff, even though that really makes no sense when you think about it. There's lots of other people and places around the world, including Canada, that are similar enough that there's no reason to think it couldn't be in Canada. Yeah, okay. That kind of got my brain going in a weird way there. But there we have it. We got through 32 different things that Americans should know about Canada. I thought this was great. I thought most of this list was absolutely true. Like, this was mostly like new information to me. Really, really interesting facts. And some of this stuff is more just like fun, cool things that, you know, we should know about Canada just in general. And other things are like, Americans should know this about Canada. Like, it's embarrassing that we don't know this. Like how Canada is not always a frozen hellscape of ice and snow year round. It's not just all igloos and snow, and that there's provinces and territories, and even the different gun laws. There were many things in this list that, like, Americans really should know. So I am really happy to be an American that knows these things now that I've had the opportunity to go through this entire list. This was very, very enjoyable for me. So anyway, if you enjoyed this as well, feel free to give this video a like or leave a comment, perhaps with what you think Americans really should know about Canada that we probably don't. That'd be very, very fun to hear about. And if you're interested in more videos like this, me reacting to Canada and Canadian culture and learning things about Canada for the first time, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching and see you next time.